Okay, so welcome everyone to our Tuesday, June 21st, 2022, 9 o'clock working session. Let the record reflect that all three commissioners are present and our executive management team. And we are going to start off this morning with Chad Coles, our Public Works Administrator.
Good morning. Thank you. Scott asked me to come in and give you a quick briefing on a resolution that we're going to put on the agenda, I believe, next week. And it's to move the property where the
Small arms range.
I'm sorry,
The small arms range. Yeah.
the small arms range.
Wow. Already gone, already retired. Hey, you're checking out slowly, aren't you? One part and another one. You have Matt come in.
Anyway, we did the research strongly indicates that the county road fund bought that property. To keep the funds clean, we're recommending that the general fund purchase that $230,000. The original purchase, just for fun, it was in 1958, $3,054. Had you invested, not even I was born. So
That's why you're only selling it for 4,000, right?
well, yeah, no, there's 230, I think. Okay. Yeah, 200. So any questions about that? Cool. I have one other item, just really briefly. I wanted to bring it for your attention. We received $6 million in National Highway Freight Program federal funding for the local project, the last piece of the corridor.
Great.
That should close the funding back to that project. We have one more administrative shift with PEMSIP. I think you and I talked about that pretty briefly. Taking some funds that we put on hold a long time ago and giving us some unspent dollars to fill about a million two gap from PEMSIP. So that's the last administrative piece, and then we're fully funded. Terrific.
All right. Well done, Chad.
I can't take the credit. It's really wonderful team members and all that.
So when did you start even planning Bigelow?
You know, the
1892.
original planning document was in 1998.
So
Just put us on track to construct final phase.
Okay,
So
anyways.
I can't take credit for the enormous speed of the project.
yeah. But I mean, how, kind of great that you get to
It is cool.
know that it's fully funded, it's gonna get finished and all of that as you
Absolutely.
take your retirement.
Feels good.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you on an unrelated item. Out at across from Northern Quest, Shamrock Paving has that big lot, and there's a corner in the back left corner of their property that the county still owns. And I think at one time we were either going to mine it or we were buying it. I'm not sure. So do we still have an interest in that property, or is that a property we could surplus?
We still have, and I'm not sure if that's the same property. We still have an active mine out there
Okay,
that we crush in. Hayford Pit is what we call it.
okay.
Produces some really good material. So we do still have an active interest in that. I think last time we crushed there was 4 years ago.
So when on properties like that the county owns, when you've pulled all the minerals out of that you want to pull, do we then surplus it and sell it, or do we hang on to it?
Yeah, we have to finish the reclamation permit through ecology. That's the surface mining permit. So we reclaim the site for that permit and then surplus. Actually, we worked with a while ago. I worked with Shamrock. They were looking to sell the property in exchange for mineral rights or crushed surfacing. never got to a completion of that deal.
Okay.
Always open to that stuff.
Well, I was visiting with them here a couple weeks ago and I think they're open to that conversation. So you might want to circle back with, I think it's Scott is the general manager out there.
Okay, yeah.
I can get you his contact information, but I think they might be interested in doing something there.
Yeah, I'll tend to talk all that. But but not know that they're revising that or revitalizing the conversation.
Okay.
Great, so I just have to say, so this is your last Tuesday now, since last Monday was your last Monday.
Yeah,
So,
Friday's my last day.
and will you be here very long on Friday or?
He's already checked. He's taking a vacation.
No, with most everyone, it's like they all do their exit interview with HR and then soon are out the door, so.
Ashley's gonna check on me at about 4:49.
Yeah, because I'll still be here on a Friday at 4.
Make sure. Yeah, I am planning on being here all day. People wandering around talking to people. So thank you. I do want to thank you all for, last few years where I've been in contact with the board, I have grown a lot, I think, and I appreciate the help you guys giving me through all that.
So how many years total have you been with Spokane County?
31.
Wow. I mean, so thank you for 31 years of service. I mean, and
I got paid for it all.
but as we know, sometimes it's not as much as you could be making out in the private sector and all of that. So there's certainly, it's choosing to come to work for government, you're choosing to do public service. So thank you.
What was
So
what's your first job here? What were you hired as?
Pavement management engineer. Here from Boeing.
So you do understand that we do have other employees that have been here for a long time and they continue to work for free. So just, that is a pattern. You're more than welcome to join.
Thank you for the offer. I really am working for free. Just not here.
We'll share with them more on that program on the exit interview.
Yeah, I'm just putting it out there, just thinking.
No, you've done a great job and really thank you. As our county road engineer, since I've been on the board, I think you've been in that position. So it's been a pleasure working with you and I hope to see you on Friday.
All right, I'll stick around until you show up. We're like 11.
Yeah, I'll check my calendar and man. So thank you.
Nice job, Chad.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. So we're off to the C Pacer ordinance discussion. So
Excuse me. So Scott has briefed you before on the CPACE program, and I know that it's an interest for the development community. So this is more of the highlight, as I know that this is going to be adopted through resolution and ordinance later, and it'll be on your upcoming calendars. The major portion of the program. Oh, sorry. No, I got it up there. Next slide. So this is just going over what has been discussed before about the RCWs, how the adoption process, the opportunities it's going to provide, and how it's gonna get the energy, renewable energy, into this area and find other avenues to do that. Next slide, please. So this goes over the eligible properties and the leasing program. The one thing that I want to reiterate is that we're just a facilitator. We don't point people to funding. They have to find their funding. We're the facilitator of the program. So our investment is getting the vetting the application and then getting it recorded on the property, because this program ties the loan to the property, not to the person that takes out the loan. So that's one thing that, it's different, and it also takes first place behind, it takes first seat behind taxes. So the loan has a higher probability of being paid off. So again, that provides more incentive for the renewable energy to come into this area to upgrade buildings, to get to that net zero is what they're really looking for. Next slide. So again, I just briefly touched on it. The one that will be the most used is the first two items, the energy efficiency and renewable energy, water conservation. I don't foresee that coming, but it's always an option. Rain collection systems, things like that. Next slide. And then the fees that we're looking at right now, we're looking for just the cost recovery of the program itself. With this being a new program in Spokane County, right now we're setting a baseline of what we've seen across that have been adopted already. Next slide.
So is this program, the way it's structured, just eligible for existing buildings, or is it also eligible for new buildings?
It'll be available for all buildings.
All buildings.
Yeah, the key is it has a dwelling unit limitation, and I believe it's 5 dwelling units or more.
Right.
But other than that, I believe we wrote it, so then that way anyone can take the opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide. And this is the meat and potatoes of it. So the application fee of $500, and then the 1% of the amount financed, minimum $2,500, maximum $15,000. So what we're trying to do is that application fee will cover, that $500 will cover the initial costs that we incur with staff and time. But the one thing that we have to look at is through this process, there may be changes, so we have to recover those costs. And then after the project is completed, then we have to touch it again to ensure that it's finalized. So these fees, Scott Chesney and I have been talking about fee structures and things like that. And this was the solid numbers that we came up with. And then we'll probably look at, our actual costs down the road on what we can do and maybe modify it in 25.
So the maximum loan amount is?
Maximum fee is 15,000.
No, the maximum loan amount.
There is no maximum loan amount.
Okay.
So if Amazon wanted to come in, and I say this because they designed their building for solar, if they come in and want to do this loan program, they can do it, put solar on their building.
Who's going to administer it for the county?
We have someone in our office, yes. Will administer and do the recording, so that way we know that it's documented, everything's documented.
Well, you raise a good question with regard to the Amazon building. So the loan would be on the entire building or just on the solar panels?
Just on the project, not on the building.
Not on the building, it's just okay. Thank you.
And those building owners are getting their own loans. We're
Correct.
just facilitating the permitting process.
We're just facilitating it, getting it through our system and recorded on the property.
And so with those fees, because if you're going to go through reporting, which is the auditor's office, that includes the cost for that as well.
Correct. It will have the itemized breakdown of everything, but that's what we're, anticipating with these fees to cover those costs.
Okay. I'm just making sure, since it's 2 different departments, that each department is getting their costs covered.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And next slide. And then this just goes over the breakdown of the implementation. The marketing of the program is self-marketing. It's like a BMW. We don't need to market it. People that are really interested in it, we're gonna put it out there. We're gonna, in the next couple of slides, you'll see where Scott's been working with Lori Carver in our office to put together a solid web page that will walk people through it, and it's gonna be easy as point and click. And so that's the large marketing piece. And people that are really interested in it already know about it. And so they're gonna go and seek out that information.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of associations as soon as we pass it that are ready to get it out there.
Yep.
So we don't have to market, they'll be doing all of that.
Yeah, they will do it for us.
Yeah. So,
Next slide. And there it is. That's what it's gonna look like. And we're just waiting for the go ahead, and then we can flip the switch and turn on that portion of BMP's webpage.
and so will most of this all be electronic then?
Yes, we have been pushing for electronics because then we don't have to provide extra or pull the staff in other directions when they can just review the application online, say, yes, it's complete, and move it forward. Next slide. Further questions?
So the way we're structured, there are no thresholds that says you gotta save X number of kilowatts of electricity or anything like that. It's just, you just have to have a energy conservation component associated with your project.
Yeah, there's four or five qualifying upgrades. And if you fall into one of those upgrades, then it could be 1 kilowatt hour, which would be a waste of money, but yeah.
Okay.
The one thing that'll help is with the smaller multi-families. Because if they hit the solar, they can get the energy credits for the Washington State Energy Code. And then they can utilize this program if they feel they need to.
And so since it's a state program, there's no Buy America requirements or anything like that associated with it. Just whatever's on the market.
Yep.
Okay.
James, would you talk a little bit about who does the build property owner utilize for verification of the eligible costs, the engineering, all that sort of stuff that gets done?
I'm sorry.
They do a third party, they're using a third party to verify all the eligible costs the building owner is, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. We are only the facilitator to get it recorded. That's what we do. They're working through their individuals that will validate what they're doing against their loan, because they have to go seek out that funding on their own. We don't provide any of that information. We're not going to set up a list. They have to find that. And again, the people that know about it already have those people set up. They already have those avenues.
Because it's really on the lender
Yep.
is ultimately responsible.
Yep. It will be basically, and it's an interesting program. Everything will be vetted. It'll come to us. We'll check the boxes, get it recorded, and then it's available.
So is there an expectation that the interest rate a borrower would be able to secure will be a lower interest rate? I think I saw that it's a longer term, potentially a longer term loan, but I'm assuming that there might be other benefits to it other than just stretching out the amortization schedule to a longer period. Maybe there's a break on interest rate or a break on other fees, or
Couldn't tell you
couldn't tell you.
that.
Whatever they work out with the bank.
They work that out with their lending.
Okay.
The one thing that it does is it makes it more appealable because it stays with the building. So if the owner of the loan walks away for whatever reason, the lending institution still has it tied to that building as basically like a title notice, a lien on the property.
Commissioner, one other benefit is in some cases, up to 100% of the project cost can be financed through the program. So it provides a level of access to money beyond that for the mortgage, beyond that
Right.
for a construction loan.
Okay.
Still, ultimately, the risk is on the lender.
Yep.
For it, so that's why it's.
Harm, no foul.
And James talked a little bit about the uniqueness of this program in that the building owner and the lender of this program will need to convince any underlying debt on this, any underlying promissory note that this has to take first position over that loan. They have to agree to subordinate their lien position for this loan. And then thereby it attaches to the property, stays the property in the event that there's a transaction to sell the property in the future. But still, it's still secondary to taxes and
Yes,
property taxes.
yeah, it takes first loan position. So taxes, this loan, and then whatever debt is on the building.
So if you have a first lender that's in the first position and they don't agree to subordinate their interest, then you're done. And so there's no way that a second can overpower a first without the first consent. Okay.
It'll be interesting to see how that works through
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
banks and lending institutions or capital providers, to see if they're willing to do that. Presumably they understand the risks and how that impacts theirs. It's adding value to the property.
Right.
Maybe not going to cause too much concern, but they're going to have to evaluate that underwriting risk themselves.
Yeah. Okay.
Just so I clear on the first question, Commissioner French asked, so this can be used on new construction as well.
Yes. So that's, no, we, building and planning worked with Matt Koza, one of our legal, to ensure that we went through and vetted it against the RCWs to ensure that we weren't dancing outside of any parameters there. So that way it can be fully utilized. If we're going to implement a program, we might as well implement it to the best options.
The challenge that I'm still wrestling with a little bit is that if I'm going to go out and get a construction loan on a new project, then that loan is already in first position. And so what is it that CPRACER is going to bring to the table that is going to incentivize me to move forward with the project? I don't get a lower interest rate because the lender is already in first position. Why would they negotiate against themselves? The one thing that might be of advantage is
Portion of the cost is affixed to the property instead of you.
Well, presumably too, the buildings
Well,
are valuable.
Correct.
the value would be being able to stretch it out over a longer amortization period because that'll lower my payments. So typically the banks are looking for anywhere from a 10 to 20 year AM. And if I could stretch that out to 30-year AM, then my payments are lowered. So that would be a clear benefit. But yeah, okay.
That and the market may dictate that. The market may say,
Yeah.
if we're seeing more and more of these, the market may say, hey, we need to look at a different interest rate for these or an even longer payment period.
It'll be interesting to see how on new construction, whether this will be approached as a second loan or whether it'll just be rolled in to one construction loan for the property. I'm not sure yet the value of separating it out unless it's that attachment to the property, separate from the borrower themselves. That might be advantageous, but I'm not sure how that's going to work on new construction.
So the one potential benefit, and I don't know, it'll be interesting to see how the lending market addresses this, is that, if for instance, I want to go out and I'm going to do a $1 million building today, and I want it to be non-recourse so that I'm not liable for the payment on the debt, then they might do 65 to 70% loan to value, and then I got to come up with equity for the other 30, 35%. But if this will do 100%, will that will that provide the incentive for the lender to either raise the loan to value or potentially, go 100% financing on it so that I've got no financial risk. I mean, that would be a major advantage if I could do a project and not have any personal recourse on it. So I can't imagine a construction lender letting you off the hook, but the permanent financer might, I guess. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how the market reacts to this.
To be clear on this, that potential for 100% financing is only for the improvements that would be financed through the CPACER loan. It wouldn't necessarily, it would not translate unless the lender themselves translated that back to a construction loan.
Okay.
It's only for that part, and presumably to get 100%, there's probably going to be risk or equity in the project somewhere else.
Well, that's what I was asking, about going back to the Amazon example. If Amazon put solar panels on their entire roof, would they be able to include the entire structure as part of the CPACER loan, or just the cost of the solar panels?
Just the solar panels and whatever upgrades were required.
Okay, so it's just the energy conservation elements that are eligible for this loan program, not the underlying structure.
Correct.
Okay.
Unless
That-
structural upgrades were required.
Yeah, okay, that provides a little bit more clarity. Okay.
Which puts them in a higher lien position.
Yes, right. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
What's next up for the board, James?
I believe that we're now gonna put it towards, we're gonna do the 10-day notice, talk to Matt. So that way we can get it on the next schedule, which I believe is the 12th of July.
12th.
For hearing and then through ordinance.
You've got a guidebook that you've created for property owners to read through how this is going to run through the process here at the county, what our responsibilities are, what their responsibilities are.
Correct. So that guidebook will be available. Again, the click, it tells you the steps, follow these steps, and here are the forms you need. And once here's the guidebook and here's the forms, follow the guidebook to complete the forms and work with your lending institution.
And this would just be, you're doing a notice of public hearing. So you're, that's the
Correct.
action you're taking.
That's correct. And the board, we've supplied that, a notice of public hearing. So the board signs that today, and Gina gets it on the calendar for the next available, or it would be two weeks from now, because it's the 10-day notice. So effectively the next available regular session, and then everything will be ready to go right into action from there. The ordinance is ready to go, and all the associated documents with the program. So as soon as the board signs it, assuming the board does on the public hearing date, then it'll be in place.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you guys for working through this, and I know it's taken a bit of time and I know the treasurer's office, association, got some additional language passed the RCW level, state legislative level for the RCW. So appreciate all the efforts and work, because I know there's a lot of people that see this as a valuable option.
Definitely.
So, okay, so then, thank you, James. We're
Thank
gonna
you.
go, Scott, I guess you have. You're gonna be talking to us.
We are here in force today.
You are.
So we have before you an update of the public participation program guidelines. You can go to the next slide. The guidelines were adopted quite a while back, 1998. And as you might imagine, they have aged actually fairly well, because the general role of public participation was defined to a large degree by the original Growth Management Act in 94 and 95. And then these were adopted subsequent to that. Next slide, please. So you can see here, they have their roots in the Growth Management Act, and as well as the Open Public Meetings Act as well. You can see here just a couple statements of providing, most notably the second part, early and continuous public participation. This is directed chiefly at the comprehensive plan process and the growth management acts or growth management actions that happen in conformance with 3670A, the Growth Management Act. So next slide, please. Here you can see the history, 1998, and a slight modification later that same year. One of the things that we discovered, next slide, please, is in 98, there was actually an admission or an acknowledgement that something called the internet existed. And there is a line in the original document saying Spokane County will keep relevant planning documents on its World Wide Web's internet site. And so it's, if nothing else, for technology reasons, these were in desperate need of an upgrade.
Sounds pretty good to me. As long as people know our website number.
That's right, right? They can dial it up from their modem and we're good to go. Next slide, please. So what we're doing along with this is, as you've heard before, really updating and upgrading our web-based and electronic communications purposes. As part of what you've heard in 2021 of translating now all of the building permit process to the web, where you can do any of that 24/7. Land use is coming along this year. The public participation guidelines, bringing that into sort of conformance with that philosophy, means that as we go forward with the comprehensive plan update in the subsequent years, we'll have this foundation in place that guides that development. Next slide, please. And one of the highlights of this is a change in our timeline for what we're calling final action, and this is chiefly related to the Planning Commission. We're going to make a 21-day notice commitment on documents that are ready for their final action. That's a significant enhancement over the statutory guidelines of 10, 14, and 15 days. So this will allow for, as they say, that robust and continuous review by our public of documents that are coming forward. And within that, you can also see here, we have the work in progress with a 1-week notice. And the difference is pretty simple. If you had to wait 3 weeks just to get feedback on a working document from a committee or the commission, you end up really taking a lot of time to get a document done. So we want to leave that out there for actionable items and then have this in place. The second thing before you is an update to our ordinances, 14-402-100, which is we're adding language in that ordinance amendment to parallel the process that you're seeing in the public participation guidelines themselves. Generally, that involves the longer notices. It involves adding something that we did this year for the first time, which was having a preview of comprehensive plan amendments through the Planning Commission before they came to you for initiation. That allowed agencies and others to comment on essentially the very raw idea, the concept of that plan amendment before we brought it forward for consideration. So there's a filtering of those, and that's codified in the amendment that's coming before you at the same time. So there are two things that will be before you on the 12th and the 19th of July. One will be the guidelines themselves, and the second will be the ordinance update that goes into our code. They'll both have resolutions. They'll both have findings of fact for your consideration and at the public hearing. So that's all I have, Madam Chair.
So can you get us kind of a red line copy of that, just so we know what the changes are?
Of the public participation guidelines or the ordinance, or both? We can do both.
Probably. I don't know how long the public participation guidelines are.
They're about 15 or 18 pages. The changes are fairly significant, but we have a red line version of that. And then the ordinance is also ready to go with a red line version that we can provide you for both.
Okay. I guess just because seeing it this way, it's pretty high level, that it's like, you know,
There has been a lot of comment. This has been before the planning commission 3 times before they sent it on to you for recommendation. It has had extensive comment from our public, which seems kind of the point if you're updating your
Right.
public participation guidelines. And so we have a lot of confidence that this is hitting the right notes, that the public wants to participate. And the planning commission did have this at 2 discussion sessions as well as a full public hearing. So it's been out for comment for quite a while.
no, good to know. Thank you. Any other questions for Scott? Okay,
Thank you, commissioners.
thank you very much. Appreciate it. And I guess I should say, if this comes before, then this will be a public hearing
Yes.
item for us as well. Okay. So next, I think we've got Dr. B, Lola, is Carrie Criddle in there? No. Hi, Dr. B, we'll just, Josh just stepped out for just 1 second. We'll wait just a moment. Is Carrie Griddle going to be joining us as well?
I think she is. Let me double check.
Okay. Then. Do we have anyone from grants that's joining us?
I don't know, Gary's on.
They're on.
I know Heather's on.
And I think Eric is actually off. Okay. Do you want to, oh, is she on? Yeah. Make sure we have everybody. Ms. Heather. There's one.
Yeah, Carrie's joining right now. Thank you.
Okay. Very good. We will look for her and then we will get started. Hopefully everyone gets to enjoy the nice weather that hopefully we're going to have for a while. She's not on. Well, Carrie hasn't joined quite yet. Dr. V, do you want to go ahead and start, or I don't know, Lola, who's going to start the conversation?
Well, I can probably start it and Carrie can join us
Yes.
we forward.
She
So
just
good
joined, so
Oh, just doing, okay. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for letting us participate in today's meeting. So I think I know everyone, but if there's someone that I don't know, I'm Dr. Velasquez. I'm the health officer for Spokane Regional Health District. And with me, I have Lola Phillips, who's the deputy administrator, and Carrie Grittle, who is responsible for all of our contracts. So the reason why we're here today is talk a little bit about the isolation facility and the contract for the isolation facility that is scheduled to end June the 30th. And the reason why we're here is to request the consideration for an extension of that contract for about another 6 months, if at all possible. And the rationale for that, and I sent some information yesterday, but let me recap. If you look at where we are in the community, we're still in a fairly high transmission mode. Just to give you some parameters, we reported about 880 cases last week, 801 the week before, and 702 the week before that. So we're still on a upward trend. Some parts of the state have actually almost peaked and plateaued, but we have not. And one of the parameters that we're following that tells us we're still going to have a fair amount of transmission is our wastewater surveillance. And the reason why we're tracking wastewater is because wastewater is independent of testing. And what I mean by that is we do know that in the state of Washington, at this point in time, with the wide availability of over-the-counter testing, we probably are only capturing 15 to 20% of all those that test positive. Now, I don't want to discourage people from using over-the-counter testing. I think that's a wonderful tool. But basically what that means is some of the numbers that we have may not actually reflect the amount of transmission in the community. And we see that in the waste water as we continue to see the number of gene copies, which is what we look for in wastewater, increasing. Now, we also know that the number of cases in the hospital have increased between 5 to 10 inpatients per week over the last 6 weeks or so. We're hitting about 70 for Spokane Metro, between 70 and 75, which is a moderate number for our hospitals that are already running pretty busy, between 90 and 100% occupancy, depending on the day. So when we look at some of those parameters, obviously there is significant transmission in the community. And yesterday I sent a list of all of our shelters as well as treatment facilities that are in outbreak mode, which is actually the vast majority of them. And despite their best efforts, they're not able to really provide isolation 100% for all of those that need it. So if you look at the data for utilization of the Salvation Army isolation facility, we are housing about 20, 25 people, which is very similar to what we saw in the Delta wave. If you recall, the Delta wave preceded Omicron, which was beginning of this year. And the reason why I bring that up is because if you look at the distribution curve for the way this particular surge is moving, is actually mimicking the distribution of Delta as opposed to Omicron. And what I mean by that is maybe not as high as we saw with Omicron, but is more prolonged. Now, we also know that one of the other aspects of this particular surge that is a little bit different than what we've seen in the past is the fact that Omicron has had a tendency of generating subvariants that tend to displace the originals. We're actually kind of like on the third major one. And right now, we do know that BA.2, which is a predominant sublineage in Spokane, is causing the vast majority of the cases, which has displaced the original Omicron. But we also know that in the state of Washington, we have significant presence of the BA.2.12.1, which is displacing the BA.2 cases in other parts of the state. And what I mean by that is right now, BA.2 for the state of Washington is about 31% of all the cases, and BA.2.12 is about 61% of the cases. And we have two other sublineages that are starting to make their presence known, particularly BA.5, which is about 7% of all cases. So basically, what that tells us is that we are going to see a more prolonged presence than what we saw with the Omicron wave. And if we translate that into cases in the community and the need for isolation, that basically validates the request, at least so this recommendation that we put in front of you to extend this isolation facility for another 6 months. Now, we do know that is an expense and we certainly appreciate it. Obviously, the community appreciates that. I do want to make clear that this facility is for all in the community, whether you are someone that is experiencing homelessness or a hospital discharge patient or a behavioral or treatment facility patient that needs isolation. We have accommodated all of those, and actually we do have a constant presence from our behavioral health facilities and treatment centers. So when we look at that, it's roughly about $150,000 a month all expenses included. Carrie can certainly take us through those numbers, and we do know that that's a significant amount. But we also understand that there may be some continued funding that could be helpful with that. So I'm going to stop here and see if you have any questions for me. I know I've thrown a lot of numbers at you, but I just wanted to give you some perspective of what we have in the community and what we think we're going to have in the community for at least some period of time. And unfortunately, we can't really predict because, again, the number of sublineages are not really behaving like the original Omicron. They're actually looking more like a protracted Delta wave, if you remember what happened last year. So I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions, or if Lola or Gary have any comments, anything I haven't mentioned.
Commissioners, Carrie Brittle here. Sorry, I was late. I was lost track of time. So as Dr. V indicated, it's running about 150,000 a month for all expenses, and Erica and Heather can confirm that. That is for all of the Happy Laundry, the meals. I believe those numbers were 28 last month, but they have been increasing. So 90% of FEMA would cover that starting July 1st, with only 10% of that amount, about 15,000 a month, that possibly could be used through the ARPA funding, the ARP funding to cover that. So we're talking about approximately about 150,000 a month, with 15,000 uncovered by FEMA. That's correct, is it not, Erica?
Erica's just unmuting, so just give her a second, Carrie.
Sorry about that. Yes, that's correct.
So is the 90% FEMA reimbursement for how long? I thought it was declining each month.
Yeah, I thought that was gone.
I don't know that FEMA has indicated an end date. Erica or Heather, have you heard that they've set an end date?
I haven't heard anything. It just switches to 90% as of July 1st is what I recall.
Just go ahead, Arian.
Do you guys know if there's any correlation to local state of emergencies and things like that that will affect this, that we need to know ahead of time based on federal allowances?
I'm not following the question. This is based on, FEMA is national federal money, so it wouldn't, be dependent upon what anybody has made the emergency order here. FEMA is reimbursing about President Biden continuing on with the national emergency order. So I think the only thing that was affected by any local recently was the transportation issue that the Guardian faced when Spokane Transit Authority pulled the vans and notified Amelia the day that they were being pulled. Fortunately, the notification got sent to Amelia's a non-working email address. The STA member discovered it and sent us out to that day. So that's what kind of precipitated a lot of the discussion that was occurring before we were notified that FEMA was cutting. But it really, in answer to your question, Erin, doesn't have anything to do with the local emergency order. So FEMA is a national or a federal reimbursement program. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, so it's contingent upon the federal emergency order, not any local or state emergency order.
Correct.
Okay. And it's not a step down, it's then just at 90% until they inform us again. Then I guess Erica and Heather.
Yeah, that's what we're aware of at this point.
Okay. So a question I have is when I look at Dr. V, the information that you sent us on the shelters, on the outbreaks that they had at the different times and the different numbers, just because looking at that versus the numbers that are going into the isolation, that it looks like a lot of them are able to quarantine, isolate and quarantine themselves. So, I mean, I think that was something we talked about, like 6 months ago is, as we were renewing contracts, is trying to get the shelters to start to provide their own isolation and quarantine space, at 5% capacity. I mean, because it's not just for COVID. I mean, it's for anything. As you know, you've got other communicable disease outbreaks and viruses that are going on around. And so just trying to figure out, at some point we've got the end of this pandemic coming. I mean, I think we're seeing that we're not, families are starting to figure out how to isolate within their homes or their apartments. I don't know, as you're seeing, you're looking at the wastewater because I think people are testing less. And so we're kind of coming down to this point. And so I'm just trying to figure out when do we start to look at that? And I think Major League Baseball, I don't know if they've announced, but I think they're looking at not doing any further testing either. So as that's happening, how are we transitioning out and when do we see that to be? Because I would think we could do a few more months and then we've just got to figure out how we transition out, especially before, the fall and winter, because otherwise I could see, we're going to need to isolate and quarantine for years if people want us to continue to do it. So that's kind of where I'm at on trying to figure out where do we really go realistically with this?
Sure, and that's a great question. And we have been working with our shelter partners to help them increase their capabilities in terms of isolation. I do have to say most of them within the constraints that they have with space actually have done a really good job of trying to utilize their space the best way possible. But most of the shelters were not really designed with isolation in mind. So I do know that there may be some physical facilities restructuring that will be needed as they continue to do that. And I do know that at some point we will get to more of a traditional endemic stage as opposed to a pandemic stage. And I think we're all looking forward to that. I think at this point in time, we still have a little bit of a challenge, as we can see by the hospitals and the outbreaks or the hospitalizations, et cetera. So we still have some risk. But part of our goal is to provide a runway for our shelters to really continue improving their abilities and capabilities within the context of what we have for the next 3 to 6 months. So they can indeed provide as much of the isolation in their facilities as possible. Now, the caveat to that is there are a couple of areas, as I mentioned, treatment centers, behavioral centers or behavioral programs that we may need to work with a little bit more, as these were not really designed for isolation, although a couple of them have developed some isolation physical facilities that are quite good. So I think since we haven't had downtime, if you think about it, we have gone from one surge to the next, to the next, to the next. It hasn't really provided enough window of opportunity for more improvements to be made. I do have to say that a lot of improvements have been made. If you think about where we were about a year ago when it was really complicated, we really had a lot of issues. So I think a lot of those issues have been addressed, and to this date, we still meet with all of our shelter partners every week. And our homeless outreach coordinator is on site in many of these shelters pretty much every other day. So we continue to work with them and we'll continue to help them develop. And I think that we'll get there. Now, there will always be some exceptions to that rule, and hopefully those we can manage in the community in a slightly different way. But when I look at trying to forecast where we are and where we're going, it's a little bit difficult just because of the behavior of these sublineages. And that's why we looked statistically comparing to previous surges other than Omicron. Omicron was a little bit of an anomaly. And if you recall, it was this exponential rise and exponential decline. It was a very narrow peak. All of the other ones have been a little bit wider. So when we look at that and try to project into the future, that's where like this kind of 6-month window came up to really accommodate not only for that, but the beginning of the school year and other issues such as fire season and et cetera, and the end of the flu wave, which this year was a fairly prolonged season, by the way. So I think all of those things are being taken into consideration within that, knowing that this is not forever, but it's a finite. And our endpoint is around those 6 months that we're putting on the table. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Any questions?
I've got one. Dr. B, where, on your graph that you've sent here, we do see the slight uptick. How does this correlate with the number of tests that have been administered? I believe, do we refer to it as a strike team that goes out and works with the shelters? Has the level of testing remained constant, or is this uptick in cases correlate with an uptick in testing?
Are you referring to the graph with the TSA or the wastewater?
The TSA.
Okay. Yeah, so I think we continue to provide testing, and testing is still a constant in most of the places where testing has been offered before, and that includes the shelters. I think what you're seeing now is just more transmission. And we do know that the testing at a community level is not as significant as it used to be, at least in the testing size, but that's because of the over-the-counter testing. But the testing efforts are correctional facilities, shelters, and any of the other congregate settings. We continue to provide that service as needed and as much as possible, and also encourage them to make themselves utilize some of the rapid antigen testing that we have for risk mitigation purposes. So there's still a fair amount of testing that is ongoing. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I do believe at least the services that we provide and the testing that we're deploying continues to be fairly constant as compared to the community sites where we have seen a decrease in the request for molecular testing.
And Commissioner Kearns, maybe I have a much smaller scale, but I've been tracking COVID for Spokane County employees for the last year and a half. And we have seen an uptick in positive cases in general. So I think the transmission is definitely occurring, and that's for both our vaccinated and non-vaccinated populations. The trend that we're seeing in my office, though, is while it is spreading more pretty rapidly again, the symptoms seem to be less severe for a majority of those people. So, I think that's maybe why we're not hearing about it as much in our local media or at the hospital, because a lot of people are just staying home, able to quarantine, self-testing, and really have a strong cold, essentially, is what we're getting a lot of feedback on. So we're definitely seeing those in our own internal metrics, as well as I think what Dr. V is seeing in the local community.
Thank you. And actually, that's a very important point. And let me make 3 points or reemphasize 3 points I just made. One is the quick transmission, and we're seeing that in our building where exposures continue to happen from community to staff members and staff members to families. And we do continue to follow a very high level of precautions, but it's very contagious. I mean, there's no other way of looking at it. That's number one. Number two, we do see a significant number of breakthrough cases, probably more than what we have seen with the other variants. And most of the breakthrough cases right now, and breakthroughs are cases that occur on people that are up to date and fully vaccinated, tend to be from the BA.2 and the BA.2.12.1, which tells us that they're evading the immune system a little bit more than before. And a corollary to that is a number of reinfections that we're seeing. And we're seeing reinfections actually at this point in time of people that had been infected in the original Omicron wave a few months ago. So those make it a little bit more complicated to manage, but as it was mentioned, clinically, a large percentage of the cases are more what I will say mild to moderate symptomatology. like a bad cold or a mild flu, which is good because that protects our healthcare system. But if you look at the number of hospitalizations, just because of the large numbers of transmission in the community, we do see an increase in the number of people in the hospital, including pediatrics. We had 2 pediatrics on Friday. So we're going to see more of that. Unfortunately, despite all of our efforts with vaccines and testing, but this is just the nature of this particular family of subvariants. That was a good point. Thank you.
So Dr. B, another question I have is kind of what's happening in other counties, because I'm hearing from other counties that they've closed their isolation facilities. So I don't know. So I mean, I know you guys just had wasn't the health administrators meeting here recently with other counties. So I don't know, Lola, if you can speak to that.
We actually, yeah, we just had the WSAFL meeting just this last month. We didn't have a lot of discussion about facilities closing. Rather, the focus was around ensuring that the emergency response for other waves was, well prepared. So that's
Okay.
Can I mean, on your graph here, it's a number of admits, the TSA per month. So I see number of admits per month. What's the average length of stay that someone's in the isolation facility? Because some of these numbers are pretty low. I mean, for June, I mean, we're not done yet, but it's 22. For May, it was 28. What's the average length of stay? And can you tell me, are these individuals that are housed that can't safely isolate at their home, or are these folks that would be classified as homeless or unsheltered that can't that don't have the ability to safely shelter at their own residence? So I know I hit you with a couple questions there, but I think kind of on each of those.
Yeah, roughly is about 10 days. And actually, to give you an example, if the contract were to expire by June the 30th, today will be the last day that we could admit people in the facility to make sure they actually had the equivalent of the 10-day period that may be required. So that's just to give you some ballpark. And of course, there's some variation there depending on where they came from. Now, in terms of those that isolate in the facility, you touch on one of the areas that has been served by this facility, which is in some environments where we have multi-generational households. Occasionally, there's not the space for someone to safely isolate, so they actually move to the isolation facility. Same thing with some of our behavioral and treatment centers. So there's a little bit of everything. Now, the vast majority of the patients that have been, or clients that have been housed in the isolation facility are experiencing homelessness of one type or another, whether it's chronic or acute or temporary. But there are a number of other clients that have been housed in the facility, such as multi-generational homes, or it could be a small family where there's not room to isolate for one of the members, typically one of the parents or one of the older members of the family, or some of our behavioral and treatment facilities. But the vast majority have been folks that are in some stage of homelessness.
Thank you.
Well, and not to neglect the hospital releases, which is similar to the situation I described. If there is a discharge that needs to be made, but they have no ability to isolate at home or in their household, then they will be transferred to the isolation facility, and our outreach coordinator actually coordinates all of those with the caseworkers at the hospitals in the event that that is necessary.
Any other, I guess I just got one more thought and comment as we're trying to figure this out. So partly, we're, I think, behind in seeking reimbursement from the feds. So I want to make sure for FEMA that we get the funding back from FEMA before I commit too far down the road, because otherwise we're committing to a lot of dollars that could be going to other uses as well. It's important to keep our community safe, so I completely agree with that. But I'm wondering if there's a way that we schedule it out just for a few more months. You know, I don't know where my fellow commissioners are. If we look at, you know, Dr. B, you were talking about getting kind of through the start of school and that kind of thing. If we look at the end of September, which is 3 months, you know, June, July, August, I guess 4 months at the end of September, to really know if that's, you know, where we're going to be and where we need to be, and takes us to that point. Would that be sufficient? Because I do know we just, you know, we got to figure this out, and we keep, you know, we're not going to be able to continue to do it forever. So that's kind of my thought. I don't know where you guys are, but that takes us through that start of school season, you know, but kind of gets us right, you know, to that point. Takes us 4 months, so it's a couple months shorter than what you were thinking. But I think that, you know, and knowing that that's kind of the timeline that we really have to figure out how else we're going to do this. You know, are we still going to do surveillance? Is that still going to be the norm to do surveillance testing, or is that not? At some point, are we, you know, stopping surveillance testing? You know, that's, I guess that's what I'm just trying to figure out, and that would give us time to really, you know, answer more of those questions and think about it. But that's kind of my thought, is to take us through the end of September, but have this, you know, kind of monthly be talking about where we're at and what's going on. So that way it's a continued dialogue with us, instead of, you know, suddenly it's all, you know, ending. And obviously we all three sit on the health board. So I mean, so we're, you know, I mean, we can continue that dialogue at the health board or here. But I think trying to understand that we at some point have to figure out where we're getting to, and again, knowing by then we'll know what FEMA is doing with the reimbursement to know how much FEMA is really going to be reimbursing or not. I mean, I'm hopeful that they're going to reimburse us for all of it, but you know, with the federal government, you never know. So that would just be my thought, to get us to where we're doing the right thing to take care of the community and look at the health and you know, continue monitoring.
I'd agree with it. I mean, and you're funded through the end of June, correct? Like June is already taken care of.
Yes. We
Yeah, so it is just 3 months. So July, August, September.
Okay.
So, because,
Thank you.
yeah, so, yeah, no, I would agree with you on that.
You know, and we can reevaluate, and if the feds are still reimbursing at that 90%, you know, then we can, you know, again, reevaluate then. But like I said, probably each month kind of keep us informed as to what's happening, and come back and talk to us.
Well, thank you. So, and I think it's actually a good idea for us to stay in this conversation, because a little bit of a fluid situation is hard to predict. I can tell you that although shelters is still not clear how we're going to manage shelters into the future in terms of testing, surveillance, etc. I can tell you from our conversations with schools, more than likely we'll have, I would like to say, a less complicated or complex approach to surveillance in schools, given the experience that our school partners have right now and have gained over the last couple of years. So I will envision that similar thought process could be applied to other areas in which we have had this collaborative partnership, such as with schools, which includes our shelter partners, to help them develop a model that will be a little bit less complex going forward. Because at some point we do need to transition into endemic and then worry about isolation for other diseases, including tuberculosis, etc., which have not really left the community completely. So if we had the opportunity to have this ongoing dialogue, I'm happy to provide you as much information as we can on a monthly basis, or we could whenever or as required. And then we can take a second look as we get closer to September, because the community transmission may have changed. I mean, it's a little bit of an unpredictable. I am hoping though that we start to peak and start to see that decline similar to Delta in the future. So that would be a good approach, I think.
Yeah, and I think the end of September is a good time because then you will be, like you said earlier, kind of through that start of school to see how things are going there. So, no. And so we'll just plan to, Dr. V, just put you kind of, mid-month for the next few months on our schedule then, so you can come back.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes, go ahead.
And Dr. V, I'm curious, and again, I'm kind of jumping in late in the game on what you're working on, but when you guys are doing isolation that's being funded through FEMA, are you following the CDC guidelines of the 5 days? So after exposure, if they're not currently vaccinated, it's a 5-day isolation window and then masking. And then same thing with positive, is it 5 days from the onset of symptoms and then masking? What does that isolation timeline look like in in this program?
A good question, and we're following CDC recommendations as applicable. And the reason why I say that is because there are some cases in which compliance, for example, with the masking may not be ideal. So we try to be as comprehensive with each individual as possible. That's why I say there's like a range that can be up to the 10 days if compliance with the appropriate precautions is not something that we can vouch for that or guarantee. But if we do try to follow as much as possible the CDC guidelines with cases. Some of these cases, compliance could be a concern. And if they're returning to like a multi-generational household or something along those lines, then the longer stay benefit kind of outweighs the release to the family environment at that point in time from the risk of transmission to others in the household or in the community. So it's a little bit of a consultative process almost with every individual that comes in. And that's why we make sure that we participate in all of these transitions of individuals into the isolation facilities so we can provide as much guidance as possible on each case. Good question. Thank you.
Okay, so if we're gonna take action to extend these contracts to September 30th or 31st, I don't know. 30. How many days in the month, sorry. So then I will need to look at opening this up to public comment since we will take final action today. So with that, we are looking to take final action to extend these contracts through September 30th of 2022. I am going to open up the public comment for this. Anyone wishing to testify, please signify by raising your hand, or anyone here in person, or *9.
I think that what I assumed you had done was maybe a motion and a second there.
Oh,
I don't know if there's a second, it's just for clarification.
Sorry. Trying to figure all this out. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think we need to have a motion before we can open up testimony. Madam Chair, I move that we extend funding to cover the isolation facility through the end of September.
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and a second to extend all contracts
Yeah, sure.
regarding the isolation facility through the end of September.
Yeah, that. Second agrees. Second agrees.
Yes.
With all contracts. Very good. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to extend all contracts regarding the isolation facility through September 30th of 2022. I will now open it up for public comment. Again, please use the raise hand function or *9 to unmute. I think it's *9, right? Okay, *9 to unmute. First call. Second call for anyone wishing to testify. Third and final call for anyone wishing to testify. Seeing none, looking around here, I will close the public comment and open public testimony. And I will look to my, any further discussion? Seeing none, okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye, motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for being here, and then we will look forward to talking with you once a month.
Well, thank you for the opportunity and look forward to having a conversation once a month. And we do really appreciate your support. We do know that it's been kind of like a prolonged challenge. And as I mentioned before, this is the only pandemic that I'm aware of that in which the economic impacts have been as great as the healthcare impacts, which is, I think we've all seen that. So we do appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so next on our agenda, we have Jeff McMorris. Arian as well.
Just a quick ARP update, the 3 categories that were open for applications closed last week. We received 10 applications for medical expenses, 6 for the water conservation, and 7 for the water and sewer. We'll be meeting with legal later today to see which of those pass muster as far as being legally an appropriate application. And then we will start going through the scoring process and bring you guys some data on that next week. We're also looking, the broadband other opened last week. We're looking at opening the water storage category this week. And I know I mentioned in the past, we're always going to be opening on Wednesdays. Since we moved to the CLA software platform instead of our own procurement, it's no longer only on a Wednesday. We can open them any day. So when we get it ready this week, we'll put that one out. We still are leaving them open for 3 full weeks. So it's always 21 days. Anybody who has pinged us with thoughts around ARP gets an email letting them know what category is open and what it's for. So just kind of that quick update today. Anything to add, Arian?
Nope, I think that sums up our current activities, and we're nearing the end of the allocations of the first grouping. So we'll kind of revisit if we want to clear those out before we review the second tranche, or Jeff and I are talking about recommendations of what we've seen come in through the idea repository and other applications if we're really eligible for that subcategory, but would be eligible if funding was put in a different category. So that will be coming and being prepared for you as well.
Thank you. Any questions for Arian and Jeff? No. Okay. Are there any miscellaneous items to come before the board? Because I think the next 2 items are going to be executive sessions, and is there any action anticipated out of those?
Yes, no.
No.
Labor?
Nope. Okay. So we'll do any miscellaneous items at this point. The blank stares. Okay.
Happy to be here. Just reminding, again, how long for you? 5 minutes.
Okay, so let's see, is Jessica or Scott gonna discuss purpose and yes, who you want in the executive session?
Yes, so this will be for pending, well, yeah, it's pending litigation on the Seliger matter, and we would have the executive management team, myself, Mr. Scott Chesney, the board, and Mark McLean present.
Okay, and that'll be for 5 minutes.
5 minutes and no action will be taken.
Okay, and then after that, Ashley?
So after that, we have labor negotiations under RCW 42.30.144. That will include the commissioners, the executive management team, Josh Grote and Mark McLean, and I expect that to last 20 minutes.
Can I add 5 minutes to her?
Okay.
I don't want it.
Same topic.
Okay, so 25 minutes total. And no action anticipated.
No action anticipated.
Okay, so it looks like we'll be going into executive session for a total of 30 minutes. For the 2 reasons that we've discussed, one being 5 minutes, one being 25 minutes. That concludes our morning meeting, and we will reconvene for our 2 o'clock consent agenda at 2 o'clock this afternoon in our board hearing room. Thank you.